I'm going to get everything off my chest. I have been seeing them since I quit my job, and I don't think I will be able to convince you before they come. I won't be able to tell it twice. What I've seen shakes me to my core. I just need you to believe me. I had just gotten out of university and found my first job, maintaining the tube tunnels beneath London. Kilometers of wide tunnels that are as black as the night. The job seemed great. Lots of pay from monitoring cameras and walking about underused passages to every now and then fix a broken pipe. I did both the night and daytime shifts, with each having their own rules. You know, the usual things. Always check the cams for broken equipment within the tunnels. If so, always check what trains are running in that area and which tunnels they are taking. Safety first. These were the rules management gave me, but upon arriving for my first day shift, I found a very different set placed upon my small desk. I walked over and stared downwards as they caught my eye. The page had almost yellowed, with the left-hand side having 3 separate regular holes stapled into it. There were 2 glaring underlined phrases at the top and at the bottom of the page. Day rules, night rules. It read the following. Rules for the day. Rule 1. Always be checking cameras, especially the one pointed at the Y intersection outside Station 3. Rule 2. If you need to leave the monitoring station for any reason, always take a strong flashlight. They do not like strong lights. Rule 3. When outside the monitoring room for any reason, do not under any circumstances make any loud noises, unless masked by a train or something else. Otherwise, they will wake up. Rule 4. It should not be active during the day, but if you fail to follow Rule 3, it will find you. Stay completely still and resort to your flashlight if you feel threatened. Rule 5. If you see any movement from the right tunnel of the Y intersection mentioned previously, do not exit the monitoring room. Rule 6. Never enter the right tunnel. The place where the night rules had been listed was absent, a cleft in the page as though somebody had torn it straight out. I was unnerved to say at the least, with a little voice in the back of my head telling me that it was all fake. Still, I decided to follow the rules despite my skepticism. So, I did as I was told. I watched the cameras, listened to music, scrolled through Reddit. That shift was overall quite relaxing. I managed to find the camera the rules were talking about in the top right of the monitor. It showed the 2 tunnels with a single red bulb giving light to the area. There seemed to be something in the tunnel. It was short and thin, almost unnaturally so, slightly hunched over by the sides of the tracks. A lever? I ignored it, standing up to wipe the screen and leaning again. It seriously looked like a lever, with how almost ruler straight the outline stood. I noticed a burst pipe on another of the cameras. It was in one of the small maintenance tunnels, not too far from my room. I got up from the desk, drumming my fingers and standing with a sigh, picked up my torch from the hanger, put my protective headgear on and headed out into what seems to be a void. Lengths of endless, dimly lit tunnels. I kept looking at my map. The monotonous corridor stretched on, endless lengths of concrete and metal. I heard something. It was quick and quiet. I struggled to remember. It was almost abrasive, like something blunt scraping against the concrete wall. I reached the burst pipe, bringing out the tools on my belt to start repairing it. There were long, thin gashes across the pipe. Not large, quite small, but deep enough to break the thin metal casting on the series of pipes. I quizzically glanced at the camera in the corner. The quiet caused me to stir, lifting my shoulders up and down slowly. I should have brought my headphones. A sudden pop pulled me out of my stupor. A crash, then the sound of breaking glass. Flinching, I almost hit the ceiling of the tunnel as it became cloaked in darkness. A knot began to form in my stomach as I felt tension creep across my face. Rule 3. Whatever the rule meant by something finding me, whether it was a prank by the night shift guy last night, or whether the rules were actually real, I didn't want to find out. I decided that the best form of action would be to quietly sneak back into the monitoring room. It wasn't that far, and the lights at the distant end of the tunnel were still on. I started to move ever so quietly, putting one foot in front of the other, keeping my ears pricked, not easing into the sudden paranoia. I was close. I could see the door to the monitoring room at the other end of the corridor as I rounded the corner. Suddenly bathed in light, it became slightly blurred as my eyes struggled to adjust. I kept walking forward and dropped my eyes. I turned around. I don't know why. Maybe it was instinct or divine intervention, but that doesn't matter now. What I saw curling from around the corner was a pair of hands. I almost missed them. They were nearly as pale as a grey wall. The nails were what gave them away. Black and long, ending in cracked and blunt ends. I didn't want to look any further. Dashing into the monitoring room, I slammed the door shut, locking it in an instant. Then I fell to my knees. I told myself that I had hallucinated. It's just my surroundings, being cooped up in a room underground. The fuzziness in my eyes that were getting used to the glaring lights of the hallway. Or being cooped up in an underground room and watching cameras. That will do that to a person. Cameras. I scrambled into my chair, whizzing the mouse around. Then the screen popped up. The camera outside my room showed nothing. Nothing outside my door. Nothing in the hallway. Nothing where the light bulb had popped. The clock in the corner of my screen chimed. My shift was nearly over. But to leave, I would have to walk outside and back through those passages. I waited a while, just sitting there, watching the seconds rise. I finally wrestled the courage to peek through the small window. Through the grating, I pulled the handle. It made a clicking, then a large groaning noise as I tiptoed out of the door. The tension in the air was palpable, and the eerie silence stung my ears. I had gotten halfway there by the time it started. At first, I could barely hear it, a distant sound that blended with the noise of creaking rails, pipes, and the sounds of trains going by. It sounded like the wind, I told myself, but as it became louder and louder, I stopped and listened. It was like someone throwing marbles or dashing the concrete with gravel. It happened in short, rapid bursts. I had just rounded the corner. The noise was still far off, 40 meters maybe. Then it stopped. Silence once again filled the tunnel. I started to walk on slowly, keeping my head turned to one side. It happened all at once. Several large pops, the high-pitched breaking of glass. The sound became aggravated, almost clumsy, coming towards me rapidly. I started to run, rounding corners as fast as I could. I wanted to make sure not to see what was making that noise. Who knows what might happen to me if I did. My panting was gradually drowned out by the soothing noise of footsteps and talking. After the first day, I was to say at the least, confused and perplexed. I sat at home thinking about it, again and again. It terrified me. I wanted to quit then and there, save myself the trouble. But I had student loans to pay, and the sum was not getting any lower. So, as the schedule demanded, the night after I descended. I still held on to that I might have imagined it, that maybe it was all a bad dream. But I could see where the bulbs had popped, a thin stretch of mangled wires and sharp glass. I stared into the hallway, and an abyss stared back. Only 5 lights had blown, but that corner seemed to lead to nowhere. As I pushed through the darkness, I noticed the walls, small, thin, slightly curved lines. like the leaves of a palm tree scratched into the concrete. They covered the following walls, like a malign infection growing in the concrete. I opened the door to my workstation and started to work. I took no chances this time. I watched the cameras more, switching between them and anything that I could use to pass time. The slow blinking red light at the Y intersection made me think that I was going to go insane. And so the hours dragged by. I was ripped from my boredom as a ghastly sound played over the cameras. All of them seemed to play it at once. A guttural scream, as though the last breath of an abandoned and dying child were being released. It howled and whined on and on. I lay low in my chair as though it could see me. But after 2 minutes the sound stopped and it ambled out of the tunnel. My mind was a whirl of thought and maniacal screeching. Should I leave the office? If so, where should I go? How fast is it? Do I have enough time to reach the surface? I felt the seconds fly by. I caught it again. I nodded. So that what was making that sound last night? I almost marveled at it in the concrete tunnels. I squinted at the screen. I am reluctant to call it human. It had all the right limbs in the right places. It moved slowly, purposefully, gradually digging its hands into the concrete wall with outstretched arms. It had a rhythmic yet stunted movement, as though effort was required to move each individual joint and tendon. It stopped, its arms beginning to shake as they sunk further into the walls. I pulled the last remnants of my sanity together and started to run. I knew that I would be at a disadvantage in the small tunnels, so I headed towards the tube tunnels close by. I stopped panting, grabbing my chest and holding my air. A pair of hands curled round the side of the corner behind me with palpable glee as it took its first steps around the corner. I could finally gaze upon the nightmare. It was tall. It was hunched as to not scrape its head against the ceiling, yet its long arms reached down and touched the floor. It covered its eyes, looking downwards. The individual parts of its spine rose like a concave herald. That smile, thin and taut, plastered across a malshapen body and skull. Suddenly, the area was coated with darkness. An inky blackness that seemed to swim across my vision. I stood absolutely still, almost stopped my breathing, trying to focus and stopping my shaking hands. After what seemed like hours, it began to move, slowly shuffling from left to right, then to the right, to the left, and back again. It started to scratch the walls. By this time, only a small sliver of self held back my hysteria. But it continued, moving around in front of me, until the sound of straining and nails on a hard surface came to an end. Then, silence. I held my mouth and nose with my hands, crouching down. Still, silence. Then, breathing, loud and from my left side, breathing in and out. I could feel it hitting my ear, wet and warm. The lights came back on. I looked up. Its thin body was strung out along the ceiling, wrapping onto the nearby walls. It leaned its head to one side. I dashed towards the nearby maintenance door, that sound following me, the sounds of marbles scattered on the hard floor. As that sound was etched into my brain, I could now pick out each individual nail scraping against the walls. I do not remember much more after that. The smell of metal and brick dust, the blinking red light in the distance illuminating the wide opening. I followed the tracks, running until I could not run anymore. I must have ran hard enough. A light in the distance, a station. I wrenched away the last of my stamina. I stood, scared, shivering, holding my flashlight tight, the beam reflecting the golden archway, bathing the platform and the crescent light, and below it read, Purpurum Sanguinem, and the large bolted door was slightly ajar.